Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. A single man fixed an alien ship without knowing she was the richest and most beautiful princess. Joran had long ago accepted that the mining colony wasn't the kind of place where life handed out surprises. The air smelled of iron dust and overworked engines. The tavern smelled worse. And the only thing that broke the monotony was whether your boots got stuck in oil slicks or sandstorms first. He sat under the half-collapsed awning of his workshop, twirling a spanner between his fingers, wondering if he could get away with calling it a precision calibrator to any future customers. Probably not. His reputation for cheap repairs and cheaper jokes preceded him too thoroughly for that. The night sky above the colony was a black ocean freckled with stars, the kind of view poets would write about if poets could survive the lung rot here. Joran was not a poet. He was a mechanic who talked to machines because nobody else stuck around long enough to listen. At least the machines never asked him to bathe. He was halfway through convincing his ancient sky cruiser to stop rattling like a maraca when a sudden streak of light tore across the horizon. It wasn't the clean arc of a freighter entering atmosphere, nor the fiery descent of a meteor. This was jagged, uneven, sputtering, like the universe had tried to draw a straight line and sneezed halfway through. Joran tilted his head. Well, that's either a drunk pilot or my luck getting interesting for once. He shoved tools into his satchel, kicked the cruiser until it coughed into reluctant motion, and pointed it toward the canyon. The closer he got, the stranger the glow became. Sparks fluttered up from the gorge like fireflies, blue and violet instead of orange. His cruiser's sensors sputtered warnings that didn't make sense, cycling through languages he didn't even recognize. He smacked the dashboard. Don't start showing off. I can barely read standard. When he reached the crash site, he nearly whistled. The vessel lodged into the canyon floor was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Sleek lines, panels that seemed to shimmer instead of shine, and a hull that hummed faintly, as though it were still alive. It made the mining guild's freighters look like wheelbarrows strapped to fireworks. He parked his cruiser at a safe distance, or what he optimistically thought was safe, and grabbed his bag of tools, which were about as appropriate for the job as a butter knife at a gunfight. The ship's airlock hissed as he approached, the sound sharp and deliberate, like the ship itself was sighing at his incompetence before he even touched it. A shadow moved behind the translucent panel. Joran froze. Maybe it was a pirate, or a bounty hunter, or worse, a tax collector. The door slid open, and out stepped a figure cloaked in fabric that shimmered with the same strange light as the ship. The hood concealed her face, but Joran caught the faint curve of a jaw, the elegant posture of someone who had never trudged through sandstorms in broken boots. Joran began, lifting his spanner like a peace offering. I'm with the local roadside assistance program. Benefits include grease stains and mild electrocution. The hood tilted slightly, and a voice answered, low, melodic, like it had been tuned by a master musician instead of formed by vocal cords. You repair vessels? I prefer to call it mechanical improvisation, Joran said. But yes, I fix things. Usually things less shiny than this. So if it explodes, you can't sue me. She regarded him silently for a long moment. He fidgeted, scratching the back of his neck with the spanner. Then she stepped aside, a quiet invitation. Inside, the vessel looked even stranger. Conduits pulsed with light instead of power readings. Panels shifted when he touched them, almost recoiling, as if the ship had feelings about being poked by a human. Joran muttered under his breath, Don't worry, I'm just here to violate your warranty. The cloaked figure stood behind him, observing. Joran could feel her gaze on his every movement, which made his hands clumsier than usual. He dropped a tool, swore, and then immediately tried to cover it up by saying, Testing gravity. Works fine. A faint laugh slipped from her, quick and melodic. Joran blinked. It wasn't often his jokes landed, especially with strangers who probably expected competence instead of sarcasm. He turned back to the console, frowning at circuits that looked like veins of liquid silver. He had no idea what half of them did, but he started tinkering anyway. All right, ship. Let's see if I can get you running before your owner fires me. Figuratively, or literally. The circuit sparked at his touch, a hiss of energy rushing up his arm. He yelped and shook his hand. Behind him, the cloaked woman let out another soft laugh. "You are not afraid." "Not true," Joran said, waggling his singed fingers. "I'm terrified, but I'm also too broke to afford dignity." Hours slipped by as he wrestled with the alien machine. Sometimes it obeyed him, sometimes it hissed like a cat. Through it all, she stayed close, occasionally offering a wordless gesture toward a panel or pressing her own hands against conduits in ways that made them calm instantly. He didn't know how she was doing it, and he didn't ask. He preferred jokes to questions. Questions meant answers, and answers meant responsibility. Finally, when he stepped back from the patch systems, sweat streaking the dust on his face, he allowed himself a crooked grin. "There. Not perfect, but she'll fly. Probably. Just don't sneeze near the left stabilizer." The hooded woman inclined her head, and though her face was hidden, he could feel the weight of her gaze. For the first time in a long while, Joran thought maybe, just maybe, life had decided to hand him a surprise worth keeping. Joran woke the next morning to the sound of something humming in his workshop that absolutely did not belong to any of his tools. His tools usually hummed in protest, not in harmony. He rolled off his cot, stepped on a stray bolt that might have been plotting his demise for weeks, and shuffled into the main bay. The alien vessel was still there, sitting like an aristocrat who had been forced to spend the night in a barn. The air around it crackled faintly, and he had the absurd impression that it was judging the dust on his floor. The woman stood near the ship's open hatch, her hood still in place, her hands trailing over the glowing conduits as though they were musical strings. Joran rubbed his eyes. "Do you come with your own soundtrack, or is that just a fancy ship feature? Because if so, I'd like to install it in my cruiser. It might drown out the death rattle." She turned toward him, silent as ever, but he caught the glimmer of amusement beneath the shadow of her hood. He couldn't help grinning. "Right. Of course. You're the strong, mysterious type, and I'm the idiot who names his tools, so he has someone to argue with." He pointed at the ship. "That there is Spanner, and that's Spanner Jr. Don't tell Spanner. He doesn't know I replaced him." Her laugh was brief but real, soft enough that Joran almost missed it over the hum of the vessel. He seized on it like a man who had just found gold in a coal mine. They worked together in awkward rhythm. Joran pulled panels open, scratching his head at innards that looked more like rivers of quicksilver than wiring. She stepped in sometimes, brushing her fingers across a surface, and suddenly what was impossible made sense. The ship seemed to recognize her touch, responding with pulses of light, like a pet too proud to wag its tail, but not too proud to nuzzle its owner. Joran muttered to himself as he soldered a conduit with sparks shooting in directions sparks had no business going. "You're lucky I didn't go into accounting. Though honestly, numbers scare me more than explosions." She tilted her head. "You fear numbers?" "Yes. They multiply when you're not looking. Trust me, I've seen it." He pointed at the tools spread around him in no particular order. "That's why I stick to machines. At least when they try to kill me, I can hit them with a wrench." Her lips curved, barely visible under the hood, but enough for Joran to feel triumphant. Humor, he decided, was the only weapon he had in this situation. That and duct tape, but duct tape only went so far with alien tech. The hours slipped by. He lost track of time, lost in the absurdity of rewiring a ship that probably had a mind of its own. Occasionally, she spoke, short questions about him, never about herself. "You live here alone?" "Alone is a strong word," Joran said, tightening a bolt with exaggerated care. "I've got the company of rust, sand, and an occasional rat the size of a small dog. I call him Captain. He outranks me." Her laughter rang brighter this time, echoing strangely in the workshop. The sound unsettled him, not because it was wrong, but because it felt right. Too right for a stranger cloaked in mystery and wrapped in technology, far beyond his reach. He noticed her ears by accident. The hood slipped when she leaned over a console, and the fabric caught just enough to reveal the curve of something long and luminous. Not like any human ear he'd seen, though to be fair, he hadn't seen many human ears in good lighting lately. These were elegant, elongated, catching the workshop's light as though spun from silver threads. He froze, staring. Then, Realizing he was staring, he blurted the first thing that came to mind. "So, is that for better reception? Like you get more channels than the rest of us?" She stiffened, startled. Then, instead of anger, she let out a laugh that startled him in turn. "Channels? Yeah. You know. Galactic cooking shows. Wrestling tournaments. The usual." Joran fumbled with his wrench, suddenly aware he might be joking with someone who could vaporize him with a thought. "Don't get me wrong, they look great. Stylish, aerodynamic. I bet if the wind blows, you could probably fly without the ship." Her laughter lingered longer this time, soft but genuine, a sound that filled the empty corners of the workshop and made him forget, briefly, how little sense any of this made. By evening, the ship was closer to working order, though Joran had resorted to chewing gum as an insulator in one corner. He pretended not to notice her watching that particular decision with concern. "Trust me," he said, sticking the last bit into place. "Gum holds galaxies together. You'd be surprised what breaks if you don't have it." She shook her head slowly, her hood hiding her face again, but he could tell she was smiling. When the vessel powered up with a deep, resonant thrum that made the floorboards quiver, Joran stepped back, arms folded, trying to look more confident than he felt. "There. She'll run smoother than my cruiser. Not that that's a high bar. My cruiser runs like an asthmatic mule." The woman placed her hand against the glowing console, murmuring something he couldn't catch. The ship responded instantly, a ripple of light flowing across its hull, and Joran realized for the first time that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a ship at all in the way he understood the word. Still, he broke the silence with a crooked smile. "So, do I get paid in credits? Or is this one of those mysterious cosmic reward situations where I end up cursed with eternal handsomeness?" This time, her laughter was rich enough to make the walls of his workshop feel less empty. Joran decided he didn't care whether the ship ran or not. For the first time in years, he felt like he might be more than just a grease-stained mechanic fixing things that didn't belong to him. Joran sat cross-legged on the floor of the workshop, with wires spilling across his lap like a nest of angry snakes, trying to figure out which one wouldn't electrocute him when he touched it. The ship hummed faintly above him, not unlike a patient sighing while its doctor read instructions upside down. He scratched his chin and muttered, "Okay, so red goes into glowing silver? Or maybe glowing silver is ground. Unless glowing silver is angry. Glowing silver looks angry." From above, her voice drifted down. "You talk to machines." "I talk at machines," Joran corrected, jabbing a finger toward the conduit. "They don't listen." "Well, they listen, but only to mock me. I can tell. See that little spark? That's sarcasm." She crouched beside him, her long fingers brushing the same conduit he had been glaring at. The spark calmed instantly, the line of light smoothing into a steady pulse. Joran pointed an accusing wrench at the panel. "You see, it behaves for you. Spoiled thing. I feel like a parent whose kid only eats vegetables for the babysitter." Her lips curved in a way that might have been a smile, but she didn't explain herself. She never did. Every word she gave him was like a coin tossed from a high balcony, valuable, rare, and slightly insulting that he had to catch it before it rolled into the gutter. The hours stretched as they worked. Sometimes he patched systems with bolts, wires, and a prayer. Sometimes she leaned close, pressing her hands against the ship's strange veins of light until they obeyed her. Once, she reached so close that her hood slipped back for a second, revealing the sharp line of her jaw and those impossibly long ears again. Joran, naturally, said the first thing that popped into his head. "So, what's the wind resistance like on those? Do you need custom helmets, or do you just fold them in?" Her eyes glimmered at him, and for a moment he thought she might actually answer. Instead, she laughed, short and sudden, like a bell chiming. Joran grinned, even as his fingers tingled from another mild shock. "I'll take that as classified information." "Fine. I didn't really want to know anyway. Except I did." By midday, the workshop smelled like a mixture of scorched metal and something faintly sweet from the ship's innards. Joran decided the sweetness was probably toxic and tried not to breathe too deeply. He jammed another panel shut with the heel of his boot and stood up, wiping his forehead with the back of his sleeve. All right, that's 3 systems down, 7 to go, and I'm running out of chewing gum. If this keeps up, we're going to have to resort to bubble gum, and trust me, no empire in history has survived that. The woman tilted her head. Empire. Joran waved vaguely at the ceiling. You know, whoever built this masterpiece probably had engineers with better haircuts than me. And meetings. Lots of meetings. I bet they argued about what shade of glowing silver to use. I bet one guy wanted teal. He was probably right. Her laughter was softer this time, but it lingered longer, as though she were storing it away for herself. The more they worked, the stranger the ship seemed to become. Panels that he had soldered shut reopened themselves when she touched them. Lights that flickered angrily at him pulsed calmly under her fingers. At one point, he even swore the ship made a sound that suspiciously resembled a chuckle when he dropped his wrench for the 5th time. He jabbed a finger at it. Don't you start. I've got enough judgmental company already. Later, when the power conduits roared to life with a surge that made the workshop's roof groan, Joran jumped back and let out a string of words not fit for polite company. The woman glanced at him with curiosity. You curse often. Only when nearly electrocuted, Joran said. So yes, often. He picked up his singed wrench, sniffed at it, then immediately regretted sniffing at it. Smells like cooked dignity. She laughed again, and he found himself smiling despite the throbbing in his hand. Something about her laughter made the emptiness of the workshop feel less oppressive, less forgotten. It was dangerous, he told himself, to enjoy that sound too much. Dangerous in a way duct tape couldn't fix. Toward evening, they managed to coax the ship into a tentative hum that suggested readiness. Joran leaned against the wall, breathing hard, while she stood before the main console, her hands spread across its glowing surface. The ship seemed to lean toward her, like a loyal hound awaiting its mistress's command. He cleared his throat. Not bad for a day's work, if you ignore the part where I almost fried myself 3 times. So, payment. Do you pay in credits, jewels, or eternal gratitude? I should warn you, eternal gratitude doesn't cover rent. Her hood turned slightly, and though he couldn't see her eyes, he swore he felt her gaze. You will be rewarded. Joran sighed dramatically. Ah, the mysterious promise. Always vague, always ominous. Next you'll tell me it's beyond my imagination, which, honestly, isn't hard. I once imagined a sandwich so big it collapsed under its own gravity. That's my bar. This time, her laughter echoed through the workshop, warm and unrestrained. For a moment, Joran forgot about the sparks, the danger, the fact that this was no ordinary ship and no ordinary woman. For a moment, he thought maybe he'd stumbled into something far larger than himself. And for once, he wasn't sure he minded. Joran woke to the sound of engines outside that definitely weren't his. His cruiser coughed when it started, hacked like an old smoker when it moved, and screamed like a dying goat when it stopped. The engines he heard now purred, smooth and synchronized, the kind of sound you'd expect from people who polished their boots and actually paid their mechanics. He sat up on his cot, smacked his head on a low beam, and muttered, Well, that's either the tax inspectors or someone who doesn't know how dusty this neighborhood gets. The woman was already at the console of her ship, her hands moving in deliberate patterns across glowing conduits. The vessel responded with rising tones, like a choir building toward a crescendo. Joran scratched his hair into further disarray and shuffled over. Morning. Or is it evening? I don't know anymore. My clock stopped working 3 months ago, and now I just ask my stomach. She didn't answer, though her shoulders were tense beneath her cloak. That was enough to tell him something wasn't right. Then came the shadows sweeping across the workshop as sleek patrol craft descended, their hulls marked with an emblem Joran had never seen. The sound made the walls vibrate. He peered out the doorway. Huh, that's new. Usually the only things flying overhead are sandbats and mining drones, and those don't come with insignias. The ships landed with precision that made Joran's cruiser look like an insult to gravity. He stepped back just as figures in dark armor poured out, weapons gleaming, boots clicking in perfect rhythm. Joran raised both hands, wrench still dangling from his fingers. All right, before anyone gets upset, let's just agree that whatever exploded in the canyon was already broken when I found it. The armored figures fanned out, forming a ring around the workshop. Their leader stepped forward, helmet gleaming, voice metallic through a translator. Identify yourself, mechanic. Joran coughed. Joran, full-time grease monkey, part-time electrician, and occasional sandwich enthusiast. Not sure which of those is the crime today. The leader's visor tilted toward the cloaked woman. Your Highness, are you unharmed? Joran froze. He turned to her, blinking rapidly. Wait, you're what now? The woman finally pulled back her hood, and the truth hit him harder than any malfunctioning engine. Her face shimmered with a strange radiance, her ears long and luminous like sculpted silver, her eyes alive with light that belonged to the stars themselves. She was no ordinary traveler, no stranded stranger. She was something else entirely. The guards dropped to one knee in unison, weapons lowered in reverence. Joran's wrench clattered to the floor. Oh, great. Fantastic. Of course, the one time I don't charge extra for night service. It turns out I've been fixing the royal family space limo. He turned to her, flustered. You could have mentioned this, you know. Like, hey, don't lick the power conduit. I'm secretly galactic royalty. That would have been helpful. The guards glared at him, clearly unimpressed. One of them muttered something that the translator thankfully didn't catch, though the tone was sharp enough to mean unwashed commoner. The woman, no, the princess, lifted a hand, silencing them without a word. Her gaze lingered on Joran, calm but unreadable. He raised his palms again. Look, if this is the part where you arrest me for unauthorized wrench usage, I'd like to point out that technically I improved the ship's gum-to-metal ratio. That has to count for something. The leader gestured sharply. Step away from the vessel. No hands are to touch it save hers. Joran snorted. Oh, now you say that. After I nearly turned myself into fried mechanic 3 times, suddenly no one wants me touching it. The princess's lips curved faintly, the smallest smile, but her voice was commanding when she spoke. He stays. The guard shifted uneasily, clearly unhappy, but they obeyed. Joran blinked, then pointed to himself. Wait me. You're sure? Because I'm very replaceable. I come in bulk. You could buy 3 of me for the price of a coffee. Her eyes sparkled faintly. Only you can finish what you began. Joran groaned. Why does everyone always say that right before something explodes? The next hour was chaos wrapped in protocol. The guards stood like statues outside, the ships casting long shadows, while inside Joran worked on the final stabilizers. The princess stayed close, guiding him when his clumsy hands hesitated over alien conduits. Once, when sparks arced too close to his head, he muttered, If I die here, please bury me with my wrench. It's the only relationship that lasted longer than a week. The ship responded slowly, reluctantly, but surely. Its systems pulsed to life in steady rhythm until the vessel thrummed with power, a contained storm ready to burst free. Joran wiped sweat across his forehead with his sleeve and staggered back. There. Done. At least until the gum dries out. The princess faced him, her expression unreadable. The guards outside shifted, restless, awaiting their sovereign's command. Joran realized this was the part where she was supposed to leave, vanish into the sky with her fleet, and never think about the dirt-stained mechanic who patched her ship together with stubbornness and chewing gum. He bent to pick up his wrench, muttering, Well, good luck ruling the galaxy, or attending whatever royalty parties you have. I'll just stay here, inhaling dust and occasionally yelling at machines. Same as always. But she stepped closer instead, her voice low, soft enough only he could hear. Come with me. Joran blinked, nearly dropping the wrench again. Come with, you mean on the ship? With the guards who already hate me? With you, the person who forgot to mention you're a princess. He laughed nervously. Yeah, that seems like a great idea. What could possibly go wrong? Her hand extended toward him, not as royalty offering charity, but as someone offering a choice. He stared at it, heart thudding louder than the ship's engines. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if a joke could save him. And yet, He couldn't stop himself. So, is there dental in this new gig? Her laughter rang bright, cutting through the heavy silence of the guards and the hum of the ship. For the first time since he'd arrived in the canyon, Joran thought maybe, just maybe, his luck wasn't all bad. Joran stood there with her hand extended, the princess waiting as if time itself had paused for his answer. The guards shifted uneasily, their helmets gleaming, their postures ready for him to decline, so they could remove his existence from the story altogether. He rubbed his chin with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of grease across it, and said, "All right. But if this ends with me wearing tights and giving speeches about honor, I'm out." The princess's lips curved just enough to reassure him she wasn't joking. Or maybe she was. Hard to tell with people who carried galaxies in their eyes. He placed his calloused hand into hers, the contrast absurd. Grease and grit against elegance and light. The ship responded immediately, humming like it had been waiting for this handshake all along. The guards looked appalled. Joran could almost hear their thoughts. Why is this unwashed creature touching her? He gave them a crooked grin. Don't worry, I washed last month. The ramp rose beneath them, sealing them inside. The ship's systems came alive in a blaze of light, consoles glowing, panels sliding into motion. Joran stumbled into the co-pilot's chair, glancing around with wide eyes. So this is the royal cockpit, huh? Bit fancier than mine. My cruiser has one button labeled, "Please work." Spoiler, it rarely does. She slid gracefully into the pilot's seat, her hands moving over the controls as if they were extensions of her own body. The ship responded, engines roaring to life, the kind of roar that shook bones and thrilled hearts. Outside, the fleet of patrol craft repositioned, ready to escort her home. Joran leaned back and muttered, "Great, now I look like a greasy sidekick in a parade float." The vessel lifted from the canyon floor, engines blazing, and for the first time Joran felt what it was like to ride something that wasn't fighting gravity, but had bribed it into cooperation. He clutched his seat. So hyperspace? Warp drive? Or do we just flap those shiny fins on the side? She didn't answer, only smiled faintly as the stars stretched into rivers of light. The ship tore through space in a way that made his cruiser's old sputtering engine feel like a toy windmill. Joran laughed despite himself, a sound caught between awe and terror. "If I throw up, please don't let it hit the royal carpet." As the stars steadied again, the fleet surrounding them moved into tight formation. A voice crackled over the comms, deferential and formal. "Your Highness, the council awaits. They demand your immediate presence." Joran raised his brows. "Council? Oh, perfect. I've always wanted to embarrass myself in front of important people. Adds variety." The princess glanced at him, then back to the stars ahead. "You will not be unwelcome." He snorted. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in years. Usually it's, 'Please leave before you break something.'" The journey was swift. Soon the fleet swept into orbit above a world that shimmered with cities like constellations sprawled across its surface. Towers rose into the clouds, ships glided like birds of light, and the planet itself glowed as though it were wearing its wealth proudly. Joran gawked. And here I was proud of fixing my roof with scrap metal and optimism. They landed on a platform of polished silver. The guards disembarked first, stiff and formal, while Joran stumbled out behind them, clutching his wrench like a comfort blanket. Nobles and officials waited in grand attire, bowing deeply as the princess emerged. Joran, after a pause, bowed too, awkwardly, nearly falling forward. "I'm new at this. My spine isn't used to folding." The council began their formalities, voices heavy with ceremony, but Joran barely listened. He watched her instead. How she held herself, strong yet weary. How she glanced back at him, subtle, as though making sure he hadn't run off. For a man who had spent years talking only to machines, that single glance meant more than all the gold this planet gleamed with. When the council finished their praises, one of them finally turned toward Joran, nose wrinkling as though smelling oil and dust offended their lungs. "And this is..." Joran stepped forward, forcing a grin. "Name's Joran. Mechanic. Fixed her ship with spit, sweat, and chewing gum. You're welcome." A gasp rippled through the assembly. The nobles muttered, the guard stiffened, and Joran realized maybe he should have phrased that differently. Before the tension could ignite, the princess spoke. He is more than that. He is the reason I stand here now. Silence followed, thick and heavy. Then the council members bowed again, this time to him as well, though their faces clearly struggled with the effort. Joran scratched the back of his neck. Yeah, don't do that. I'm not good with respect. Makes me itchy. Later, when the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Joran found himself beside her again, staring out at the endless towers and lights of her world. So this is it, huh? Your palace, your empire, your everything. And me, just a mechanic who once argued with a toaster for burning his bread. She turned to him, her eyes steady, luminous, carrying both weight and warmth. You are not just anything. You are the one who helped when others would not, who saw me not as title, but as person. He swallowed hard, suddenly out of jokes. Then, because silence felt too serious, he muttered, well, to be fair, I also saw you as someone with suspiciously aerodynamic ears. Her laughter rang out, light and unrestrained, and Joran felt something settle in him, something he hadn't realized was restless. He wasn't just the lonely mechanic anymore. He wasn't just grease and dust and half-finished dreams. He was part of something greater, not because she was a princess, but because she'd chosen him, and he'd chosen her back. When the stars rose above the city, he leaned on the railing, wrench dangling loosely from his hand, and said, Guess the galaxy finally surprised me. And this time I don't mind. The princess stood beside him, her presence radiant, her laughter still echoing in his ears, and together they looked out toward a future unplanned, unpredictable, but undeniably theirs. The end.